All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Cape Coast Castle. My name is Belinda, and I'm going to be your tour guide. So I'm going to give you a history about the castles we have in Ghana and also about the slave trade. But then first of all, we are going to start with an introduction. So along the coast of West Africa has about 64 castles. Among these 64 castles, about 40 are situated in Ghana. Among these 40, however, 3 are castles. The first castle is the Elmina Castle, built by the Portuguese in the year 1482. The second is the Christiansborg Castle, built in Accra, Osu, by the Danes in the year 1661. And this is the Cape Coast Castle, the last and smallest castle, built by the British in the year 1664, mainly for the slave trade. So the difference between the 3 castles is that Elmina and Christiansborg were built initially for trading purposes. So when they also started with the slave trade, they had to transform some of their storage rooms where they kept their goods into dungeons to accommodate the slaves. However, inside this castle are the actual dungeons, because this one was built purposely for the slave trade. So then what brought about the slave trade? Initially, the Arabs were dominating the trade markets. So they would go to Asia, buy the goods, and serve as middlemen and trade with the Europeans. However, the British, they wanted to break that monopoly that the Arabs had over trade then. Therefore, they decided to find an alternative route to Asia themselves to go trade with the people. And on this journey, they came across the coast of West Africa. When they got here, however, they had in excess what they were going to look for in Asia. And in excess, I mean the gold, the ivory, among others. Therefore, they decided to stay here rather to trade. And while they were doing this, a man named Christopher Columbus claimed to have discovered the New World, which is the Americas. And he started to work on plantations. Initially, he was using the natives that he went to meet on the land to work on the plantations. However, they were dying easily. So a priest who hadn't come in contact with the Africans and knew who the Africans were suggested to Christopher that they should come for the Africans. For the Africans were farmers themselves. So it is going to be easy to use such group of people to work on the plantations. The name of the priest was Bartholomew de las Casas. So that ushered us into the slave trade, where Africans were captured along the coast of West Africa and sent to the various plantations to work on them. Once the slaves were captured, they had to journey on foot to present-day Ghana, then Gold Coast. Because they journeyed on foot, most of them died as a result of fatigue, and then wild animals attacked most of them as well. However, those who survived the journey and were brought to Ghana were first taken to a place in this region called Asin Manso before they were brought into the castle. Asin Manso has a river known as the Slave River. So inside that river, the slaves were made to take their last and final bath. For once they were brought into the castle, there was no bath for them. At Asin Manso also, their hair was shaved to hide all forms of gray hairs, because no company present then to buy slaves wanted to buy old people to work on their plantations. Shea butter was also applied onto their skin for their skin to look much more younger, so that once they were brought into the castle, they were going to attract higher prices. Once that was done, they continued the journey on foot to the castle. Once the slaves were brought into the castle, the first place they were taken to is known as the Palaver Hall. That is where they auctioned them and sold them out for goods such as gunpowder, liquor, mirror, fabrics, tobacco, among others. After the exchange was done, they had to brand them to give them an identification. So companies present then who had already bought their slaves had their names or logos on the metals. The metals were dipped into hot fire. Taken from the hot fire directly, it was applied onto the chest, shoulder or back of the men, and for the women, their shoulder or back. So once the metal is taken, it leaves the name or the logo of the company that bought them on their skin, identifying them. Some also had portions of their ears cut off, all for the sake of identification. Once that was done, the men were separated from the women, and the men were kept down here, which is the male slave dungeon, to wait for their ship. 100 meters from this dungeon, they had the female slave dungeon to accommodate the female slaves as well. any questions before we continue with the open talk? Alright, if no questions, we are going to start the tour from this very place, which is the male slave dungeon. So please let's all move inside. But then let's all be careful of our steps, for the floor is a bit slopey and slippery. Alright, please let's move inside. To 200 men. So inside this chamber, about 200 men were kept here. So for the 5 chambers, about 700 to 1,000 men occupied the male slave dungeon at a time to wait for the ship to come for them. In here, their only source of light and ventilation were those 3 tiny holes we see on the wall. So apart from that, they had no extra light and ventilation. And slaves inside the dungeon did everything inside the dungeon.
Where everything is.
They defecated, urinated, they were fed here, they slept here.
They slept in their poo.
Yes, till the ship came for them. So due to conditions in the dungeon, most of them died. But then once you die, no befitting burial ever was organized for any slave. They just bagged them into sacks and threw them into the sea.
Was there any idea you could get that when they want to ease themselves, maybe they agreed a particular site?
They were to use these trenches. But considering how dark the place was and how choked the place was, they had to do it wherever they were.
How long does it take for the ship to come?
About 3 months. So slaves inside the
You're
dungeon.
kidding me, right?
We hear more shocking news.
So slaves inside the dungeon could stay here within a day to 3 months, depending on when you were brought in and when the next ship came. So let's say if you were brought in today and the ship comes tomorrow, it means you stayed here for a day. But then if you're brought in today and the ship left yesterday, you'd have to stay here for like 3 months, waiting for the next ship to come.
And the place wasn't cleaned up, it wasn't
No.
cleared.
They believed that when it rained, rainwater should pass through those 3 tiny holes, come inside the dungeon, wash away the waste through these trenches to the sea. Alright. So the bricks we see on the floor happens to be the original floor of the dungeon. And these bricks were discovered in the year 1974 by a group of archaeology students from the University of Ghana. They came over here for an excavation. So it was after the excavation that they discovered these bricks. Before they came, however, something covered the whole surface. What we have over here, this dark substance. And looking straight from the second to the fifth chamber, we see no bricks. So after the excavation, they took samples of these for testing. And after the results came out, it was known to all that what we have over here and what we are going to be working on from the second to the fifth chamber are all solidified waste of the slaves that were kept here. They are poo, urine, food particles, sweat, blood, vomit, everything mixed together to form this. And sorry.
Excuse me, could you also inform the mark, these marks? The purpose of these marks on the wall.
Alright, so it wasn't made by the slaves.
Yeah, I know that.
Brothers and sisters in the diaspora, the Africans in the diaspora, they believe that their direct ancestors were kept back here. So when we come, I believe they write these numbers inside the
Yeah, people were inside that level.
This is the first chamber of the male slave dungeon. So where we just crossed is the second chamber. So just like the first chamber, 150 to 200 men, source of light and ventilation, the tiny holes we see over there. The hole we see here was in front of a church. So right above this chamber, they built a church. Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, SPG. Now the Anglican Church or the Church of England. So as they were moving inside to worship, they could hear the screams and cries of the slaves. Everything going on down here, yet they worshipped above them.
In the name of Christ. You see why some say they won't be Christians.
Now, those who were going there to worship were whites.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
Now, they were the same people involved in this trade.
Yes.
So what were they worshiping?
That's why I say in the name of Christ.
I don't know. I
And
can't tell.
did they have any form of sympathy somewhere else in their life?
For them, it was a business.
Just business.
The slave trade
It was
only
a
ended
business.
in, I think, 1834, when the British monarchy gave a command for them to stop the trade. So they had no form of sympathy.
So the church had a priest.
It was the priest that suggested to start the trade, right?
Right.
No, it's not a
Bartholomew.
it's not a it's business.
No,
Yes.
she said somebody, Bartholomew.
I'm asking this because it might so be that there is no priest. It's just themselves wanting
Oh,
to.
they had a priest,
fellowship.
and at some point, an African man who had the privilege to go outside to study and was ordained priest also came here to actually lead the church. Once we get to that point of the tour, I'm going to speak about that.
Okay.
He was leading and his people were
Pardon?
here and he was leading.
Oh, yes.
Inform our lifestyle. Yes, yes, we are.
So you see something to revolt.
Exactly.
All right, please let's move.
Sorry. So, even this place was expensive.
That was before they go to the south. So these are the rooms. Okay, she's at the back of this thing. Tell me.
Let's all come inside. All right. So this is the fifth and final chamber of the male slave dungeon. And as we all can see, inside this chamber there are no artificial lights. But this place is brighter on its own than the four chambers with artificial lights now. This is because when the ship finally came to take the slaves to the various plantations, this is where the final selection was done, where the weak ones were separated from the strong ones. The weak ones were kept inside that tiny chamber, making the strong ones go because they wanted strong men to work on their plantations. The men had to go through an underground tunnel that connected this chamber straight to the door of no return. So from this end to the last end, there was a broad entrance to an underground tunnel. However, this tunnel was blocked in the year 1834 by Captain George McLean to signify that the slave trade was officially ended. So if this place was an entrance to an underground tunnel, obviously the shrine wasn't here. So before the British came, the Africans here were worshipping a god of their own called Narrated. And this god is believed to be the leader of the 77 gods they have in this land, and is in the form of a rock, a very big one for that matter. But then because they wanted to introduce to the people Christianity, they decided to build the castle on the rock. So the foundation of this castle is the rock. However, those who still believed in their traditional way of service took smaller portions of the rocks into their homes to continue their worship. So when the trade was over and this place was left empty, they decided to bring it back to its original place and mounted the shrine for their god. So that is a portion of the rock over there, another portion of the rock up there. The money we see on the rock, offertory from the traditional worshippers. Some are also tokens from tourists like yourselves, those who believe in the traditional form of worship. The stones we see there are for the traditional worshippers. Most of the time, there is a man here who is a priest. So when they come, they sit and talk to him, and he will do the communication to the God on their behalf. The reeds we see here are from tourists like yourselves. They bring them here every time they visit to show their respect to their ancestors and the slaves that were kept here, and to mourn those that died in here as well.
So how long do you take this trip? Because if everybody is going at the time, this place should fill up now.
Well, they take some out once they feel like it has getting very bad. We throw them out. So as you can see, those here are kind of new, but then those they are very old. So. Any other question?
Those who were stronger, energetic, will go through the
Underground.
underground tunnel. Those who were weak were kept here.
Yes.
Forward.
They just
They leave them there.
yes.
When
They
you
just
die, they
left.
straight away.
Thank you. They just left them there to die because they saw them to be burdens.
Why not just
No. Once you were brought here, there was no going back for you. It was an end journey. Like once you were brought inside the dungeons, that was it. It's either you survived and they took you to the various plantations, or you died and you went straight to the sea.
So when they die, they are just thrown into the sea.
Yes, back them into sacks and
The slaves themselves will back them. The whites will not back them. You ask the slaves to back them into sacks and throw them into the sea.
Sorry, I'm curious. Was there ever a thought of trying to open this door to check?
the tunnel. No.
We can only see through when we are out. I mean, there's a lake. You can
There
see
is a place, we call that the view of the underground tunnel. It gives you a chance to look through the tunnel, but for here, I don't think it will ever be opened because it was closed to signify that the slave trade has ended.
Okay.
Yes.
We hear more shocking news as we go along.
All right, please let's move on. Was the African men and women, the slaves, were just put into sacks and thrown into the sea. Their people were given befitting burial. Most of them were buried there, just that after the excavation was carried out inside the castle, only 4 graves had their names or initials on them. That is why we see just 4, but most of them are down there. However, just one African man was buried here. This is his grave. So why this African man? His original name was Kweku, the Wednesday born from this very land. Kweku's father was Obrempong Kojo. However, his father was part of the few African men who were capturing their own people for the British. So
Business now.
Yes. So due to his father's activities with them, his son Kweku gained a scholarship to study theology in the Oxford University. After his studies, he was ordained priest, making him the first black man ever to be ordained priest. After he was ordained priest, they baptized him and gave him a Christian named Philip. Then they couldn't really pronounce the local name Kweku, so Kweku now sounded as Kwaku, making it Philip Kwaku. So after Philip was ordained priest, he came back into the castle and he was leading the church that was built on top of the dungeon. However, after some time here inside the castle, treatment became bad for Philip. Therefore, he had to move outside of the castle to work to fend for himself. And as he was doing that, he introduced some of the natives around him, or the Africans around him, how to read and write, Western form of education. Therefore, over here in Ghana, we attribute Western form of education to Philip Kwaku. So the first school built here was named after him, Philip Kwaku Boys, and he died at age 75 years, 1816. Please let's move this. All right. Alright, so this one here was a soldier. His name was C.B. Whitehead. He died at age 38 years. Some believe malaria killed him. Others believe he was shot in one of their fights with the Dutch and he died. The middle part belongs to Letitia Elizabeth London. Letitia was the wife of Captain George McLean, so she came into the castle to visit her husband. But then just after 2 months, she was found dead inside the husband's bedroom. We have 3 schools of thought concerning her death. The first believed malaria killed her. The second belief, when she came, she got to know that her husband McLean was having an extramarital affair, an African mistress. Therefore,
African beauty.
African beauty. Therefore, out of jealousy, she poisoned herself. The third believes that the African beauty rather came into the castle, disguised herself as a maid, and poisoned Letitia, so she could have McLean to herself. She died at age 36 years. And the last grave belongs to Captain George McLean himself. He was the man responsible for blocking the entrance and exit points of that underground tunnel I was talking about in the 5th chamber of William's dungeon. He also introduced the first Western port in Ghana up there, also known as the McLean's Port because it was introduced by him. He died at age 46 years. Alright, please let's move this. Mr. Thomas. So they had a door over there. But with the intention of making this place a condemned cell to kill, they had to seal that door. And the condemned cell had 3 doors blocking it. First door, middle door, last door. So once the slaves were brought inside, all 3 doors were closed, leaving them here to die. Now all 3 doors are open, but please can you feel the heat? So imagine if all 3 doors were to be closed now. The sad thing about this place was, let's say 5 men tried to fight for their freedom today, and they were brought in here. Until all 5 were dead, nobody left. So every time a soldier would just come in to have a quick look to see if they were all dead or some were still alive. So if one person should die first, the remaining 4 struggling to die added another struggle by smelling the dead body of their fellow slave man. So they were dead. Once they were dead, as usual, just bag them into sacks, straight into the sea. It took over 100 years. It was a gradual process.
100 years.
Small.
All right. So what we have here is a cell, and the name of this cell is the condemned cell. Condemned cell because it was a cell designed to kill, not to punish. So with this one, their living bodies were taken inside, but only dead ones were brought outside. It was for the men inside the dungeons, those who were trying to fight for their freedom. To their masters, they were being rebellious. And then once you were classified as rebellious straight, you were brought in here. In here, they had nothing, no food, no water, no light, no air. Yes, so once you were sent inside, you just struggle, suffocate, and you die. All doors and windows we see inside the castle today have been replaced, except for the door of the condemned cell, made of the pitch pine tree. All right.
So this is about 300 years old.
All right. So we are going inside.
And this door is older than you.
Please watch your head. Watch your head. Watch your head. Watch your head. Or they didn't submit to their masters.
I'm surprised, that's why I'm asking this question. Were they not rather supposed to be kept since they are strong? So why would they be thrown here to die?
The British wanted people that would listen to them. You know, some of the African men were very stubborn.
Not stubborn.
That
They were heroes.
Yes, but to them, they were stubborn.
Right.
They wanted people that would submit to them, to their rules and regulations. They didn't want people that would give them a tough time. So once you were just being stubborn to them, they would bring you here.
Let me ask something later. Just look at the military or the police today. When they come to arrest you. Those who resist are subjected to severe molestation to submit. So the same thing will do.
But I was thinking that if it is about getting them to submit, for example, they could have used various means or
This
other
is the means
means
they chose.
to get them to submit because they are very energetic.
They
But
are
to resort to this, that though they are very strong, we just want them to die. Anyway.
You hear that from the women and you laugh. And then you have to think around.
Oh, this is a church.
This is the Palava Hall. Earlier in the introduction, I mentioned that once slaves were brought into the castle, the first place they were taken to is the Palava Hall over here. This is where they auctioned them and sold them out for goods such as gunpowder, liquor, mirror, fabrics, tobacco, among others. Everything we see over here today have been renovated. It is not original. And this is where the popular bond of 1844 was signed as well between Commander Hill and 8 fancy chiefs from this very. That ushered Ghana into colonialism as well. Any questions so far? Oh, God.
Now you said this is where the slaves were brought first.
Once they were brought into the castle, they just match them over
They
here.
match them here.
Sell them.
And then they sell them before they are taken into the dungeon.
So after selling them, they took them to the forecourt where we have the graves now, and then they branded them with the metals and stuff after straight into the dungeons to wait for the ship.
Branded with metals.
Yes.
As in
They put
Sign-
those,
That's what
all
the
kinds of
tattoos today.
slaves.
It's
Okay.
similar thing.
so they put the metals into hot fire. So once it was applied onto your chest or shoulder or back and it's taken, it leaves the name or the logo of that particular company that
that
bought
buy-
you on your skin. So once you were taken to the various plantations, they could just easily group you into.
So that means they can buy slave here,
Yes, they bought
and
them.
before they go to the plantation, they might die.
Yes,
That's a loss for them.
it wasn't because they had insurance just like we have insurance now.
Insurance on slaves.
Yes, so they didn't really care whether the slaves survived or died because once they died, they still got their money back for the slaves.
Quick one. How were the swords treated?
Uh,
The sword.
They were not treated. After the branding, they just took them. Everything that happened here was inhumane.
So some were infected.
Yes, that is why
Definitely.
most of them died. The treatments given to the slaves were very inhumane.
Wow.
To me, they were not treated as human beings.
They are treated as properties.
Yes.
I
And
treat my
goods and
my phone, my
commodities.
properties with care. What are some things? No. Go.
So were the slave masters Christians or Muslim or Buddhist?
They were Christians.
They were Christians. And then they were treating people like that.
The church alone speaks for itself. And it was on.
That's why
This is John.
Well, but then some argue
Okay, this is not a church.
that it is not about the church or the religion, because some argue that even to date we have some group of Christians or group of Muslims or even the African traditional religious people
That do slaves.
that are still abusing their yes. So they believe that it is not about the church or the religion, but the people that brought it, the people that came here were the problem. That is what some.
Well, that's the defense we give. But when we look at England, the Church of England is a national church. So far as you are an English person, I'm a Methodist. I know much about Western history. Wesley was an Anglican priest. Okay, so once you are an English person, you belong to the church. You go to the church. Just like in Ghana, the Asante Hene's family really belongs to the Anglican church.
Yes.
So either you go to church or not, this family, our church is Anglican.
Yes.
So as they came in, they were Christians by name. We may say they might not be born again today. But so far as they came from their country, they were Christians. And they were here for business.
Exactly.
And they brought the priests for their morning devotions and co. And they weren't involved in their business. It was business they were looking at first.
Let me clarify something. I'm kind of a historian. Slave trade has been existing before Anglican.
And that's why she said that
Even
the Arabs were doing
Jews and all this historical, they do slave trade. So it's actually not about religion you are, it's about who you are.
Yes.
Because, okay.
It's about the human personality, not the religion. Alright. So I mentioned earlier that Captain George McLean introduced the first Western court in Ghana, also known as the McLean's Court because it was introduced by him. So we are right inside Ghana's first ever Western court. This is where he sat also to draft the bond of 1844. So after the bond was drafted over here, then they signed it inside the Palace. Alright. Who just living inside the castle, protecting the castle from enemies or attacks. So where we have the art shops now, or where they sell the African stuff, were all chambers or rooms where the soldiers were living. And yes, and the middle part, which is now a cafe shop, was their canteen. So this area was for soldiers alone, all white soldiers, no black person was a soldier then. What we are actually standing on now is original, made of the pitch pine tree, just like the door of the condemned cell. We don't have pitch pine tree in Ghana, so it was imported. Those are also original. They are called the marble stones as well, also imported.
They are 300 years old.
Yes. Still solid.
How special are they? What are the attributes you can give to this pine tree, whatever name you give? Is it because they can stand the weather, the sea? Is it because they are so durable?
I asked the reason why they last. There is another group over there. So once they descend, you also go there. Where the governor received and entertained his visitors. And in here was his personal office as well for personal matters. So you can go in to have a quick look so we continue with the talk. Alright. So the British, after building this castle, also built, before that, let's all look up there. We see a white tall building with a red roof. Can you see that building? Yes. It is called Fort Williams. So after building this castle, they built Fort Williams, stationed soldiers over there. And I mentioned earlier that soldiers were living inside the castle as well. So soldiers over here and soldiers over there were communicating together, protecting the castle from enemies or attacks. So during the daytime like this, they were using flags, normally red flags. Afternoon time, they would use mirror, even in torchlight. So anytime soldiers over there notice enemies or danger approaching the castle, they signal those living inside the castle and they use these guns. That is why we see these guns all over the castle. The round black balls are known as the cannon balls. They put those cannon balls into the guns, apply gunpowder, and then light it. So once the gunpowder touches the cannon ball, it shoots, hitting the ships of the enemy, creating holes into the ships for the ships to sink. So that is how they protected this castle from 1664 till 1957, after Ghana gained her freedom from them. Even after that, it took them 3 extra years to finally move out of the castle, somewhere in 1960. So, you can take a few pictures.
I didn't even see you.
Alright, so this is the living room of the government. The church also served as a classroom den for the children they had with the African women after raping them. They were educating those children inside the church as well. And this is the hall we saw down there. So as they were moving inside to worship, they could hear the screams and cries of the slaves. Everything going on down there, yet they worshiped above them. Now it is no longer a church, but a children's library, open to all kids around this place to come in for free anytime they are done with school. With this, when the trade was ongoing, they harvested rainwater from the roof of the castle and stored it in here for domestic purposes. Everybody inside the castle then used water from this well. However, there was a difference. Water from the well was used in its raw state for the slaves, but for the slave masters, the governors, the captains, the soldiers and stuff, the water had to be purified by boiling. Now it is still a well, but we no longer harvest rainwater. Now it is pipe. Serves the same purpose, domestic purposes. So anytime we lose water from the towns, we use water from this well to run the activities of the castle, like the washrooms and stuff. Please let me know. Oh, please. Do we all remember the underground tunnel I was talking about? All right. So I was asking if we all remember the underground tunnel I was talking about inside the fifth chamber. Yes. So this place is a view of that underground tunnel. This place was made in such a way that nobody could go in or come out. But anytime they were doing the shipment, a soldier is stationed over here. So once the men moved from their chamber through that tunnel and got to this place, he would just command them to move faster, to walk faster to the door of no return.
Is it like a stair?
No. A view of the underground
place
tunnel.
that was
It
blocked.
connected them
If
from
you
the
go to
fifth
that place,
chamber
you come.
straight to the door of no return. So this one is a view of that tunnel. So once the men moved from their chamber and walked through the tunnel and got to this place, he would just command them to move faster to the door of no return. Please, do we get it? All right, so you can all take a quick look so we continue. But please make sure you don't fall. Officials inside the castle then when the trade is ongoing. All right. Another view of the tunnel, so it connects them straight. Please let's come inside.
Come in. We are tired.
All right. So this place was the exit point of the underground tunnel. So from the fifth chamber of the male slave dungeon, this is where the male slaves would arrive. It was built in the same year, just like the entrance, 1834, by the same man, Captain George McLean, for the same reasons when the trade was officially abolished. And that place was the initial door of no return. So I told you it connected them from their chamber straight to the door of no return. But then they had to block this door of no return and create another door of no return, because with this one, sometimes the sea came inside to disturb their activities when they were doing the shipment. All right, okay. All right, so we have another cell here. However, unlike the condemned cell designed to kill, this one was to punish. So it was a punishment cell, but it was for the women, those who resisted rape. So once, yes. So once you were selected to be raped and you resist, you were brought in here. In here, they punished you for like 7 days, and you were fed just once a day through the tiny hole we have here. The small hole down there was for them to ease themselves. But then even after the 7th day, the punishment wasn't over. Please let's all look up there beneath the staircase. Do we see the round black balls? Mm-hmm. They are called the cannon balls, and they are very heavy. These already women were asked to carry like 3 of those cannon balls at a goal. Not to stand with them, but then to walk with them.
3 at a go.
3 at a goal.
First of all,
Highly impossible. But then even if they should attempt to do that, and one should fall out of the 3, so as I work with them, and one should fall, means I have given him to be raped, or I've said yes to rape. So technically speaking, it was very difficult for a woman to avoid rape.
you have to take bath and look beautiful.
All right, so this is the female slave dungeon. We have already visited the male slave dungeon. So this is the female slave dungeon, where the female slaves were also kept to wait for their ship. Over here, unlike the male slave dungeon with 5 chambers, the women had just 2 chambers. This one and the one just opposite us. However, no special treatment were given to the women. Everything the men went through, they had to go through the same thing. So just like the men, 150 to 200 women were kept in each chamber. So for the 2 chambers, about 300 to 400 women. Source of light and ventilation, the tiny holes we see on the wall. The window we see behind us had iron bars blocking it. However, it was for the governor or some officials inside the castle den to just stand there, look through the women,
Select.
and make their selection.
My God.
Those they wanted to rape. After a woman is raped and they get to know she's pregnant, they take her outside of the castle. They had domestic slaves to take care of her till she gives birth. Allow her to breastfeed her child for like 3 months. But then right after that, the child was taken from her and she was brought back here to wait for the ship.
3 months.
Yes. That is why I said they were educating those children inside the church atmosphere. However, the education they were giving them, they brainwashed them to believe that whatever was going on here was the right thing. So some actually grew up to become slave masters, just like their fathers, with no contact or relations with their mothers. The only time a woman inside the dungeon had an opportunity to take a shower was when she was selected to be raped, because the governor or the officials, they couldn't stand the smell. So until then, she remained in her feces, in her urine, in her menstrual blood, sweat, vomit, food particles, and the rest, till the ship came for her. So what we are standing on, just like the men, isn't cement nor sand, but rather the solidified waste of the women that were kept here. We should all ask ourselves, so if these British wanted strong people or strong men to work on their plantations, why include women? Because we know by nature itself, women are not as strong as compared to men. They had a reason. They knew if only men were taken to the various plantations, due to conditions and treatment, most of them were going to die. And as they are dying, they are going to lose great numbers. But then if the women are added, they are going to be reproducing, to be filling in for the dead ones. So history has it that at a point, these women were forced to mate with the men so they could reproduce, to fill in for the dead ones. All right.
Where the food that were giving them, were they giving them, okay, were they giving enough water?
I can't say enough water. They were giving water, but I can't say the water was enough.
I think the water was thrown at them. Like they threw it at them, so nobody can gather. You gather it. It comes up. Which we don't know, we are not.
Alright, we are not going to do it. Since I need help with lifting this.
Linda, you're doing part of your speech.
Please let's just put it here. Thank you very much.
You come out to Ghana.
All right. So this is the door of no return. However, I mentioned earlier that all doors and windows we see inside the castle today have been replaced, except for the door of the condensed cell. So this is not the original door of no return. The original door of no return was a very short and narrow door. So once the slaves got here, still in chains and in shackles, they had to really go down before they could move through the door of no return. Now it was called the door of no return because basically once slaves were taken through this door, it's either they died or when they survived, they couldn't trace back their roots to where they were taken from. Because once they were taken to the various plantations, their original identities as Africans were taken from them. Their local African names taken, baptized and given Christian names, then added the names of the plantations that got them. So that becomes their new identity now. They were then forced to let go of their original language as Africans and learn how to speak the language of their masters, making it very difficult for them to trace back their roots. Sorry, making this door the door of no return. And slaves taken through this door were mostly taken to the Americas and some to Europe as well. Let's move out.
Oh, we return.
We go to this boat. We'll take you there.
Alright, so because of the sun, you can come this way. The sun is very hot. Let's come down. Once the slaves were brought outside, initially we didn't have this fishing community here. The whole place was covered with sea water. However, the shores were very rocky. So the bigger ships in to take the slaves couldn't make it to the shores. So they have smaller boats to take them in smaller quantities to the bigger ships and off they went. Now, when we look back, we have the door of return. This door of return was introduced in the year 1998 after Ghana celebrated something that we call emancipation, to welcome all our brothers and sisters from the diaspora who are able to trace back their roots not to Ghana alone but then to Africa in general. During that year, 2 mortar remains were brought from the Caribbean countries that the slaves were sold into to represent all slaves taken from this very castle to the Caribbean countries. 1 man, 1 woman. The name of the man was Mr. Samuel Carson from New York, and the woman was Madam Crystal from Jamaica. So once their remains were brought over here, a ceremony was organized for them called the Great Homecoming. After this ceremony, their remains were taken to Manso and buried there because they couldn't trace the specific African country they were taken from. But every slave before he or she was brought into the castle was first taken to Manso, where I mentioned that they had their last and final bath inside that river. Their hair was shaved to hide all forms of gray hairs. Shea butter was applied onto their skin for their skin to look much more younger and attractive. That is why they took their remains there and buried them there.
So that means some slaves from neighboring African countries are being brought here.
Slaves from
Neighboring African countries.
West African countries.
Yes. This is like the place to
yes,
take off.
that's why I said once the slaves were captured from those West African countries, they had to journey on foot. So
Okay,
before they would even come here, most of them would have already died on the way due to fatigue, and also wild animals attacked most of them as well. So once you were captured, whether from Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, you journey on foot to Ghana. That is where they go to their castles and stuff for the trade. But then before they were brought into the castle, they first stopped at Manso. That is why they took those mortar remains to Manso and buried them there.
Why Manso? Why were they taken first?
They had the slave market over there.
And that's where they take their last bath before coming to the castle also.
Inside a river known as the Slave River. So up to date, if you pay a visit to Manso, they are going to actually tell you the history about that river and.
When are you celebrating such a festival again? Why not during that festival? You organize tour to Manso.
I
think the emancipation, something like that. The festival you organize.
Golden Stairs because it was created and used by the British alone in and out of the castle. they couldn't use that short and narrow door of no return. So created this, named it the Golden Stairs, and they were using this one. Yes. All right, please let's get back inside. You can take.
Is there another place for us to see?
No, I'm coming to conclude it.
The artifact.
It is undergoing renovation.
Okay.
Alright. No, I was gonna ask about that. Alright. So this Aquaba here means welcome. To welcome all those who are able to move through the door of no return now and come back successfully. So I welcome you all back inside the Cape Coast Castle. Any further questions before I conclude with the talk? Or contributions, suggestions? Anything at all? Everything is welcome.
Anything is fine.
All right.
So
During our time today as humans, we should make sure that such inhumane activities and practices that occurred over the years never repeat itself again. So if you see any form of injustice going on around you, try to do something in your own way possible to put a stop to it. You know, it is believed that when the trade was ongoing, the Africans around this place all came together as one to fight or rebel against the British. The trade wouldn't have been successful as it was. So now, if you can't do anything as an individual, seek the help of those around you. Let's all come together as one and fight injustice, all right? Thank you very much for listening. Okay, that's very good.
all right, so follow.
Thank you.